This is a secret weapon, a leaked threat, and a shocking betrayal rolled into one, and it could turn the entire North American sky into a game-over zone overnight. The words did not come wrapped in diplomacy. They came like a hard switch being flipped. Donald Trump has openly threatened to pull certification on every Canadian-built aircraft operating inside the United States. Not just one model, not one manufacturer. Every Bombardier Global Express jet, every Canadian regional aircraft. Grounded, frozen, neutralized. This was not regulation. This was retaliation. The justification sounded technical. The reality was political. Trump accused Canada of blocking America's most advanced Gulfstream jets, claiming Canada was acting lawless by refusing to certify them. His response was simple, brutal, and deeply destabilizing. Choke Bombardier until Canada bends. Within minutes, aviation markets went into panic. Executives started asking the same question behind closed doors. Can he actually do this? Pilots wondered whether their aircraft would be legal to fly the next morning. Insurers froze underwriting decisions. Leasing firms started drafting emergency contingency clauses. Because this threat was not theoretical. Decertification is not a tariff. It is not a fine. It is not paperwork. It is a kill switch. If pulled, planes do not slowly wind down operations. They stop instantly. No flights, no passengers, no exceptions. And this is where the shocking truth emerges. The United States does not merely allow Canadian aircraft, it depends on them. Hundreds of Bombardier business jets are woven into corporate America's bloodstream. Regional airlines rely on Canadian-built aircraft to connect second-tier cities. Medical flights, charter networks, emergency logistics, all suddenly vulnerable. Yet Trump framed this as leverage, a power play, a way to force Canada to free Gulfstream jets. But buried beneath the rhetoric was something far more dangerous, the quiet collapse of a system that only works when safety is sacred and politics stay out of the cockpit. This was not about airplanes anymore. This was about turning the sky itself into a bargaining chip. And the moment that threat was spoken out loud, something irreversible began moving because Canada was not cornered, Canada was calculating. And what happens next decides whether this ends in negotiation or in an aviation war nobody can stop. Cliffhanger, because the next move does not come from Trump. The threat sounded powerful until the numbers behind it were exposed. Aviation analyst Phil Dury issued a warning that should have stopped this escalation cold. The United States operates more than 1,700 Canadian-built business jets. That number does not include the thousands of regional aircraft derived from Canadian platforms that quietly keep America's domestic air network alive. This is not a niche dependency, it is structural. Suspend those aircraft and you do not punish Canada first, you paralyze the United States. Airports lose routes overnight. Regional carriers collapse under grounded fleets. Corporate travel halts. Medical transport chains fracture. Insurance liabilities explode. Litigation follows like shrapnel. This is why Dury used a phrase that cut through the noise: economic suicide. Hundreds of billions of dollars in downstream exposure, not theoretical losses, real ones. Leases, contracts, insurance claims, lawsuits, bankruptcy cascades. And that's before global markets react. Because certification is not just permission to fly, it is a trust signal. When the United States turns aircraft safety into a political weapon, every international regulator pays attention. If Washington can pull certification for trade leverage, then no aircraft is ever truly safe from political retaliation again. That realization triggered quiet panic far beyond North America. European regulators began reassessing cross-certification assumptions. Asian aviation authorities started asking uncomfortable questions. Leasing firms began modeling worst-case scenarios where U.S. approvals lose their credibility premium. Trump's threat did something catastrophic in slow motion. It told the world that American certification could be revoked not for safety, but for spite. And here is the betrayal no one in Washington wanted to say out loud. Gulfstream jets were never truly banned from Canada. Several already operate there under existing approvals. Canada's regulator, Transport Canada, had not issued a political refusal. It had issued technical reviews, the same process applied to every aircraft from every country, which means the core accusation was false. And when false claims are used to justify nuclear options, the result is never strength. It is collapse. Because while Trump believed he was tightening a noose around Bombardier, he was actually placing a blade against America's own aviation throat. And that is when Mark Carney stepped forward, not with outrage, not with threats, but with something far more dangerous to a bluff: calm, documentation, and facts. And when facts enter a panic-driven standoff, someone always loses control of the narrative. Cliffhanger, because Canada's response does not escalate the fight, it dismantles it. Mark Carney did not raise his voice. He did not issue counter-threats. He did not blink. And that restraint is exactly what made Washington nervous. Because Carney's response did not live in politics, it lived in process. He stated, calmly and on the record, that aircraft certification in Canada is handled by Transport Canada, an independent technical authority, not a bargaining chip, not a campaign lever, not a pressure valve for foreign leaders. Safety, data, engineering, period. That single clarification detonated Trump's narrative. Because once certification is framed as a technical process, the entire threat begins to look reckless, worse, illegitimate. Carney then did something devastatingly simple. He pointed out that Gulfstream aircraft already operate inside Canada, not hypothetically, not secretly, actively, legally, safely. That fact alone exposed the accusation as hollow. There was no blanket ban, no lawless blockade, no hidden embargo, just standard certification timelines and compliance reviews, the same ones Canada applies to Airbus, Boeing, and Bombardier alike. Suddenly, Trump's threat looked less like strength and more like panic. And behind the scenes, something else was happening. Canadian regulators quietly circulated documentation showing cross-certification precedents, historical approvals, joint safety audits, shared data pipelines, a paper trail that proved cooperation, not obstruction. This was not retaliation, it was a mirror, and Washington did not like what it saw reflected back. Because if the United States moved forward with decertification anyway, it would be admitting something dangerous, that safety rules no longer mattered, that aviation standards could be suspended on a whim, that certification was now a political weapon. And once that line is crossed, there is no reset. Carney understood this, which is why he never threatened to ground American aircraft in response. He did something far more strategic. He let the world watch. He let insurers read the documents. He let European regulators observe the contrast. He let airlines quietly realize who was still playing by the rules. In this moment, Canada was not fighting the United States. It was positioning itself as the adult in the room. And when a crisis becomes a credibility contest, the side that keeps its composure usually wins, because the other side starts to escalate. And escalation was already brewing. Because if Trump backed down now, it would look like weakness, and if he pushed forward, he would light the fuse on something much bigger than Bombardier. Cliffhanger, because the next phase is not about Canada anymore. It is about the system itself beginning to break. This is where the damage becomes permanent, because Trump's threat did not just target Canada, it attacked the foundation of international aviation. For decades, the system worked on one sacred assumption: safety standards are apolitical. When regulators certify an aircraft, the world trusts that decision because it is insulated from power games. The moment that assumption collapses, everything else follows. And that is exactly what began to happen. Quietly, at first. International regulators started asking a terrifying question. If American certification can be revoked for trade leverage, why should we anchor our safety systems to it at all? That question alone sends shockwaves through the industry, because certification is cumulative, trust compounds over time, and once doubt enters the equation, premiums spike, reviews slow, and parallel systems emerge. Trump believed he was pressuring Canada. Instead, he was accelerating fragmentation. European authorities began signaling that they would no longer treat United States certification as presumptive. Asian regulators discussed contingency pathways. Leasing firms began drafting contracts that assumed dual or independent certification tracks. This is what collapse looks like in slow motion. Not explosions, not headlines, just the quiet unraveling of assumptions that once held the sky together. And here is the most shocking part. The United States loses more than anyone in this scenario. American certification has long been a global gold standard. It gives U.S. manufacturers leverage, speed, prestige, trust. Weaponize it once, and that advantage evaporates. Carney did not have to say this out loud. Industry leaders understood immediately, which is why conversations shifted, not about retaliation, not about lawsuits, but about alternatives. If the rules can be rewritten at any moment in Washington, then long-term planning becomes impossible. And when planning dies, partnerships die with it. This is where Europe enters the frame. Airbus does not threaten certification for political gain. European regulators do not tweet ultimatums. Their process is slow but stable. Stability is oxygen in aviation, and Canada noticed, because what Trump framed as a show of dominance was being reinterpreted globally as a warning label: unreliable, volatile, transactional. And once that reputation sticks, it does not wash off easily. This is no longer about planes. It is about whether the sky remains governed by rules or by whoever shouts the loudest. Cliffhanger, because Canada is about to make a move that turns this threat into a permanent realignment. The shift did not happen with a press release. It happened with meetings that were not photographed. While Washington argued and threatened, Canadian aviation officials quietly reopened conversations that had been dormant for years. Airbus, European regulators, joint certification frameworks that did not depend on American approval as the final word. This was not retaliation. This was insurance. Because once Trump turned certification into a political weapon, Canada had to assume it could happen again. And if it could happen again, then relying on a single volatile partner became an unacceptable risk. Bombardier understood this immediately. Their engineers already worked to European standards. Their compliance teams already spoke the language of dual certification. What changed was urgency. What changed was intent. If the United States could pull a kill switch on a whim, then Canada needed an exit ramp, one that did not require permission from Washington. Europe offered that. Airbus offered scale. European regulators offered predictability. Long-term contracts offered something America suddenly could not: trust. And this is where the betrayal cuts both ways. For decades, Canadian aviation was structurally tied to the United States. Shared supply chains, shared certification, shared assumptions about rational behavior. Trump shattered those assumptions in public, and when assumptions collapse, alliances do too.
European officials did not cheer this. They did not gloat. They simply prepared. Because every Canadian aircraft certified under a European first framework is one less aircraft that needs American approval to survive. Every joint program weakens Washington's leverage. Every long-term contract quietly redraws the map. This is not decoupling in one dramatic moment. This is erosion. And erosion is irreversible. Inside U.S. aerospace circles, the panic became impossible to hide. Executives began asking whether Trump understood what he had set in motion. Lawyers warned of cascading contract breaches. Lobbyists scrambled to contain damage that could no longer be spun away. Because this was never just about Bombardier. This was about whether the United States could still be trusted as the anchor of global aviation. And once that question is asked seriously, the answer matters less than the fact that it had to be asked at all. Canada did not announce a pivot. It simply stopped waiting. Cliffhanger, because the final consequence is not political embarrassment, but permanent strategic loss. This is how a game-over scenario actually unfolds, not with a single explosion, not with a dramatic grounding order, but with quiet decisions that lock in new realities. Trump believed he was cornering Canada. Instead, he exposed the fragility of American leverage. By threatening decertification, he revealed that the United States was willing to sacrifice its own credibility for short-term pressure. And credibility, once spent, cannot be reclaimed with speeches or elections. The shocking truth is this: even if Trump backs down completely, the damage is done. Canada has seen the risk, Europe has seen the opening, global aviation has seen the precedent. Certification is no longer assumed to be sacred when it comes from Washington. It is now conditional, political, unstable, and that changes everything. Bombardier will survive. Canadian aviation will adapt. New partnerships will form. New standards will harden elsewhere. The United States, however, will spend years trying to convince the world that this was an exception, not a rule. But aviation does not run on promises. It runs on predictability. This episode will be studied in boardrooms, not campaign rallies, as a case study in how not to wield power, as a lesson in how leverage becomes liability when panic replaces strategy. Trump wanted to force compliance. What he triggered instead was diversification. He wanted dominance. What he delivered was distrust. And in the sky, distrust is fatal. Because once airlines, insurers, and regulators stop assuming good faith, they design systems that no longer need you. That is the real collapse. Not Bombardier falling, not Canada blinking, but the slow, structural sidelining of American authority in an industry it once led unquestioned. This was never a trade dispute. It was a warning, and the world heard it loud and clear. The sky did not go dark overnight, but it changed forever. Game over does not always look like defeat. Sometimes it looks like being quietly left behind.